Hi, everyone. Welcome to this next session. I'm Jose Quinteros, part of the organizing committee for this year's conference. And it's always a pleasure to host sessions like this, where we get to learn from people who are, truly shaping the way organizations lead and transform. Up next, we have the pleasure of welcoming Peter. Uh, Peter, quick introduction. He's an executive coach, author, and certified Scrum trainer with over 15 years of experience, helping leaders and organizations, navigate the complexities of agile transformation. He's widely recognized as the creator of the personal agility system, a framework that helps individuals and teams align their actions with what really matters. And he's as well a founder of the Purple Institute, an initiative focused on enabling authentic culture change within organization. And as well, he recently launched BizBus, a mobility company redefining business travel. Um, Today, he'll be sharing his insights on a thought provoking topic, leading culture change, agility, and leadership unspoken truths. So, with that, Peter, I'll hand it over to you. And thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Jose. It's very much an honor to be here. I have to admit, I feel a little bit like I'm walking into the lion's den because, PMO is the project management office, and I've been working, basically with Scrum for the last, 15 years. And, everybody knows Scrum doesn't have project managers. And so, oh, wait a minute, what does this mean for me? And kind of what is our relationship to each other? And so, what I'd like to do is, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I think the world has changed a lot since Scrum got started, and I hope to explore some of these things. And just our last session with Louise, we were talking about kind of how do we as PMOs, how do we enable change in organizations, and that's kind of what I'd like to look at today. So one of the things that I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about concrete results. And I've put a Mentimeter poll into the chat. And the idea is to understand where we are in terms of our ability to deliver actual concrete results, not just to stakeholders, but to actual users and customers. You say, wait a minute, users and customers, I thought we were paying attention to stakeholders here. And that's kind of the interesting question because, ultimately what determines our success in the marketplace are our users and customers. So, let's see how we are. And, you'll see that there are, there's none of the following and then 5 possible answers. Pick the rightmost answer that applies. And we'll come back to this in a few slides. So I got into Scrum about 15 years ago. And but the funny thing is, back in the day, no one had heard of Scrum. A lot of people were complaining about the state of projects and project management, but people weren't actually willing to change. And I got called into this project, and 3 months or 6, well, especially 6 months after the project started, my client was really very happy with it. Now, at the beginning, he was rather skeptical about it. And in fact, he was a very frustrated person. So let's, to get started, let's take a look at my first client and how we got started with Scrum. The project, so my employer had made an agreement with his company about 2 years previously, a little bit more than that, to develop a new product for their customers. So this was a B2B2C project, if you will. And 2 years into the project, they had just made their first release. It was one of these famous, Death March projects. They were so happy to have something out the door. But our customer's client got a hold of it. And well, there'd just been a change in leadership there as well. And the new project manager, client's project manager, he was like in shock. He kept finding bugs and it was missing essential features. And his attitude was like, how could you possibly? And so we were really challenged at the level of working product. And in fact, by the time I got involved, my client was so frustrated. He was saying things like, if the previous project manager's name is still on the invoice, I'm not going to pay the invoice. Okay, so you see, this is the problem that we had to fix. And, I came in and I had discovered Scrum about 6 months or 8 months before, and I'd been looking for a project to do with Scrum. And this project was such a mess, I was warned away from it. They said, no, you don't, this guy's, unpredictable and irascible and all kinds of things. You don't want to get involved here. But on the other hand, if you come in as a senior guy and you can't solve the big problems, kind of what's your reason for being there? So I took the project anyway. I won't go through the details of how we, got him calmed down, got him started on prioritizing and focusing on what we really had to do. We'll just skip to the happy end 3 months later. And we had identified and fixed all of the problems that the client's client had identified. The client's was happy. Their management was happy. My client's management was happy. My management was happy. And we all got together for a wonderful Christmas dinner. So in short, we were able to fix the issues. 3 months later, this was 3 months after I took over the project. 3 months later, we were actually collaborating together to define new products. We'd really created a trust environment. And a year after that, one new team member said, I've been warned away from this project because it was so horrible. But you know what? I don't see what's horrible about it. We're doing good work. Our customer appreciates us. We're very collaborative. We went from, this isn't the worst project in the company. In fact, it may even be the best company. Now, I asked my client about this. And I asked him about this whole Scrum thing. And he was really skeptical about Scrum because, well, there were things he liked about it, like he got to decide what the priorities were. I asked him to be product owner, by the way. He got to set the priorities, and we made very transparent decisions on these intervals we called sprints, which lasted 3 weeks. What he really didn't like about it is he wasn't allowed to change his mind once he'd given the mandate. That was really hard to swallow. But then he looked at the results 6 months later. And it's funny because I was standing, across the room or, across the table from him, and he was literally moving his fists. This is me. I come with my wishes. This is my team. They come with reality and we wrestle with each other. Okay. And that planning session is really intense, but then we leave with an agreement that both sides can support. Okay. So neither one gets everything that they want, but we got something that works. And that actually became, when I was taking a course in sign language back then, and I tried to say, well, how do I explain Scrum to people who've never heard of it? And that for me was the 3 words: conflict, agreement, and then calm. My product owner's opinion of projects was every project he's ever been in has had moments of chaos and confusion. Scrum is the only framework that he's been involved with where the moments of chaos and confusion came at the beginning and not at the end. And given the choice between having that chaos at the beginning or have it at the end, he much prefers to have it at the beginning. Okay, and that was our agreement with Scrum. And this is why, at the end he was saying, yeah, took some getting used to, but I really do like it. So obviously there's a change that go through here. And I think part of it is thinking about, well, when we're working for a company, what do they really want from us? What do we really have to deliver? And it's interesting, the larger the organization, and by the time the organization is large enough to have a PMO, it's actually kind of challenging to keep focused on what's really important. And I think there's kind of a hierarchy here. The first thing they want is working product. Okay, if you don't have a product, you can't sell it. If you can't sell it, there's no income. That gets everyone's attention, depending on the size of the project, potentially all the way up to the top. The next thing they want is it to be on time and on budget, because not being on time means, well, all that stuff about income I talked about, that's not happening. Being on budget, I think, is actually overrated. I think it's more about being able to afford it and not having the development go out of control. But you got to deliver something, and you got to deliver something on time. Now, and that's kind of the goal of every project manager: deliver the scope on time, on budget. Agile kind of challenges that because they say, hey, wait a minute, we don't know what the scope is. And the budget's maybe not the most important thing, but having a release, having something to show, that's important. And in fact, where does competitive advantage come from? Well, 2 things. First is better, and the next is sooner. Okay, and in fact, if if you look, excuse me, at what's coming out of state-of-the-art companies these days, they say the true competitive advantage is the ability to deliver sooner. And in fact, when we talk about achieving genuinely transformative outcomes, they involve delivering better, which by the way, almost always means cheaper, and they mean delivering sooner. Okay. And so for me, that's kind of what companies expect from me. I think that's what companies expect from you. And so the interesting question is, how do we get there? I mean, we all know this. We want to have results. We want to have it sooner, but why is it so hard to get? So what I'd like to do is I'm going to give you another 30 seconds just to see how we're doing in the. If you haven't filled out the poll yet, please do so now. This is kind of looking on the scale of what can our teams actually deliver. Okay. Now some of them, this was 15 years ago. My company was challenged to deliver working product. Okay. Being able to deliver stuff on time was, hey, that was kind of the next level thing. Now, in all honesty, I believe we've made a lot of progress coming on, moving forward. So let's see, we're getting down. I'm going to give it 10 more seconds, maybe 5 more seconds, and then we'll see. We'll take a look at how you guys, what's your perception? Okay, drum roll, please. Okay, so what we're seeing. Looks to me like we got, if I'm interpreting this correctly, we got 11 responses here. Some people, some organizations are challenged even delivering working product, much less delivering it on time or accelerating. About a quarter of you guys say we are capable of delivering working product. But notice that means not delivering working product on time. So that's kind of challenging. A sixth of us are saying we can deliver working product, we can deliver working product on time, and the products are getting measurably better. Okay. Better products sooner. Okay. If you want to take a look at an example of this, look at there are graphs for the space industry where they compare various rocket companies. How quickly can they launch? Okay. And they have this thing called the learning curve where they say, okay, we launched 6 months ago, then we launched 3 months ago, then we launched 2 months ago, then we launched a month ago, then we launched, that's an accelerating learning curve. And that means the company is actually getting better at what it's doing. Now, one of the things that surprises me a little bit, and maybe you'd like to kind of share in the chat what's happening here. I'm a little bit surprised that, we're claiming quite a bit of challenges along the way, but a substantial number of us are actually seeing transformative outcomes. Okay, because I believe that transformative outcomes actually depend on being able to deliver better products and having a learning curve that actually getting better at what you're doing. But I could be wrong on this, so I'd like to hear, maybe during the Q&A we could hear from people and see, hear a bit more about what's happening there. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about what I call the hidden truths of agility and leadership. And a lot of people think, oh, what is this agile stuff? And yeah, this, does it help? Is it useful for everything? So let's take a look at these hidden truths. Now, you didn't actually expect me to reveal them all at once, did you? No, that would be much too easy. Okay, so let's start with where I'd like to end up, by the way, is what skills does a modern manager, and notice I didn't prefix that with project manager, product manager, scrum manager, any other kind of manager. What kind of skills does a manager need today? And that's where I want to take this. So let's start exploring some of these truths. So everybody ready? Here we go. The first is, I believe that companies genuinely need what agility has to offer. Okay, there's a hierarchy here from being able to deliver stuff that works to on time and on budget, being able to improve continuously, being able to accelerate that learning curve. These are all prerequisites for transformative outcomes. And I believe that this is what companies are really looking for, even if maybe they talk about other things that seem a little bit more, more focused on the lower levels. Why do I believe that? Well, because I keep getting hired to do that. And in fact, one of the things you might want to do, particularly if you've just taken on a new assignment. Imagine your client or your stakeholder or your manager or whoever is writing you a recommendation. What would you like to be on the recommendation? And what I would suggest, what you would like to see, and what I would personally work towards achieve is to have some sort of tangible business goal, some sort of tangible business benefit. Okay, in my case, my last mandate, I spent 9 months working for a heavy industry company. They basically cut metal and stamp it and do all the things that's modern manufacturing. We cut the time from idea to validated prototype from over a year to under 3 months. Okay, that's a tangible business benefit. Okay, and what I found, what I find challenging, from some of the stuff that I've heard around managers and project managers, they talk at very, very meta levels, and it's not really clear what people mean. Okay, so imagine you're trying to specify that tangible benefit. Okay, and try to identify that so that you can talk about it, and then 6 months later, or 9 months later, or a year later, you can say, "Hey, we've achieved this." Okay. Now, by the way, when we talk about agility, for me, agility is an enabler for genuine business goals. We use agility is not a means in it, or sorry, an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And it helps us in a lot of different areas. Okay. But what companies really look for is speed. That is the ultimate competitive advantage. Can you innovate faster than your competition? If you can, you're going to be cheaper. You're going to be better. That's going to be your advantage. And that's, by the way, that's what I do. I've written a number of books on this in this area. 2 of them, I think we mentioned, Personal Agility and Purple Skills. I've also done some work in contracting, and you can see me with Joe Justice there in the lower right-hand corner at the Wikispeed factory. So we actually pioneered applying agile methods to manufacturing physical things. In his particular case, a car. So I'm going to show you this just so you believe me, but let's not pay too much attention to it. Let's go on to substance. One bit of substance, I talk about truth, okay? And truth these days has become kind of harder and harder to wrap your arms around. I mean, it seems like we have multiple visions of the truth, and you kind of wonder if they're in the same reality or not. So I'm just going to offer my perspective here. Thanks to my work with agility, I've been able to travel the world and work with people from South America to Southeast Asia, South Africa to St. Petersburg, which is practically on the Arctic Circle. I've really had a complete view, and I think I've learned a couple of things. One of which is I try to learn from the people who I work with, and I try to share what I've learned. I'm not trying to tell anyone anything. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm offering information, and I'm hoping that some of it resonates with you. Agility at its heart is about learning. Okay, it's about assuming that we might not know the answer. We might not even be asking the right questions. Okay, and so we're always striving to learn. And so whenever I say something here that I believe is true, well, let's just remember a little, for humility's sake, I could be wrong. And, that's what the discussion is for afterwards. So first truth, companies need what agility offers. So what's the next one? Well, to be really honest, agility and management have had a troubled relationship. Now, probably certainly for the first 10 years, the most widespread agile methodology, well, first extreme programming, it was supplanted very quickly by Scrum because Scrum was more generalized and more easily teachable. More recently, we might talk about SAFe. I think we can have a conversation today about whether SAFe is the most popular agile framework today or not. But Scrum was the one that made it happen. And a lot of people, they say they're doing agile, and what they really mean is they're doing something that looks something like Scrum. And Scrum started out from a very developer-centric perspective. Okay, it was the actual development part was very strongly modeled on extreme programming that was by the developers for the developers. In fact, if you talk to the founders of extreme programming, they say the purpose of agility was to make the world safe for developers. So you come in as a manager and you're saying, wait a minute, the developers, they're pushing back on me and they're saying, give me space. I don't want to give him space. I want him to do what he's supposed to do. And so we see this tension that was always there from the beginning. And of course, Scrum doesn't have any managers in it. So you say, wait a minute, what does that mean for me? And in fact, that conversation, that I had at the beginning with my first client was actually kind of typical of the challenge that you had working with Scrum. Okay, we're going to do this wonderful thing called Scrum. Okay, great. What does that mean for me? Okay, well, first of all, you got to stand down. Okay, you can't just tell the team what to do every 3 days. You give them a mandate, you tell them what you want, and then you don't change your mind for 3 weeks. And he's like, but what if I have to change my mind? And that was really challenging. And when we start talking about making this a system, it actually gets a bit deeper, because we actually ask the managers to kind of stand down a bit and say, let your team solve the problem. And says, wait a minute, but I'm a problem solver. Now, of course, some things don't change. As a manager, you have accountability. You're responsible for results. If those results don't happen, ultimately you're going to get the blame. And so, we've got the manager here kind of, confronted with new ideas. And, you can, well, if you've been in this situation, you can probably hear the voice in the back of your head saying, is this going to be a good career move? Do I really want to do this? Okay. And I think this is actually one of the big problems that the Agile movement has had, is it's kind of alienated, the brains of the organizations. And these people have been saying, is agility good for me? Do we want to do it? And they push back and they say no. And so we see organizations that, make an agile transformation, and then they revert to more traditional approaches. Now, for me, this is a bit strange, because for me, agility is not Scrum. Scrum is a easily teachable framework to help us be agile, but it doesn't really teach us the mindset. And mindset is kind of a difficult thing to teach, because wait a minute, my mindset is mine. Who are you to change my mindset? So what I like to do is start with a brief discussion about the Agile Manifesto. Let's just focus in. It's 73 words. Everybody should read the manifesto. Maybe go and read the second page. That's another 120 words or so, but you can do it in 10 minutes, including the time to Google for it to actually find the text. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping each other to do it. Okay, and this for me, gives us the essence of agility, which is about learning. By doing it and helping others to do it, that's collaboration. Now notice I didn't highlight that developing software part, because at least theoretically, we can replace that developing software with almost anything else where we have a complex problem, and it still works. To get the third element of agility, you actually have to read the second page. The first principle, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer. Okay, then something about software, which we can safely ignore. Now, I think we could have a conversation whether the highest priority really is to satisfy the customer. There might be cases where that's true, and there might be cases where it's not. But notice, first and foremost, this is about clarity of purpose. Okay, and we're going to see that clarity of purpose is really helpful to achieving any challenging goal. So learning, collaboration, and purpose. This is, for me, is what agility is about. And when we look at the tasks that both developers and managers have to solve, there's a lot of commonality here, and I think we haven't appreciated that enough. Okay, and the commonality is complexity and problem solving. Okay, and I've always thought, managers are fundamentally problem solvers. You got where you are because you're a good problem solver. So why should you stand down and not solve problems? And that feels a bit weird. So let's look at kind of how they're similar and how they're different. Okay, the Agile Manifesto was written by software developers for themselves, and so they were looking at better ways of developing software. And software development is a complex activity. It's not easy to do. It's not even easy to know if you're getting it right on the first try. Now, leading an organization is also a complex activity, but just because they're complex doesn't mean they're the same. And in fact, I had a very interesting conversation. I was paired with an expert in lean manufacturing. And we talk about complex versus complicated. He thought software development was complicated, and I thought manufacturing was complicated. So each one thought their own domain was complex. And I think the point that both of us had missed is that both domains are complex, but they're complex in different ways. So let's look at how they're different. Okay, and one of the things that I think the software folks don't appreciate about the problem of managing things is that there's actual genuine risk. Bad things can happen if you don't have your risks under control. And losing money is the least of them. When you're working in any kind of heavy industry, when you're working with transportation, people are at risk. Okay, and that risk is not something that you can easily delegate. And what that also means is that psychological safety. I think everyone's kind of recognized that psychological safety is a good thing. It gives you the freedom to think and solve problems, creativity. But given the context of genuine risk, it's actually difficult to achieve that. Okay, and at the top levels, I'm not even sure if it is achievable. And the other thing, and this is what really differentiates software development from management. The complexity of management comes from the huge number of things that all have to happen at the right time, at the right place. And that requires juggling lots and lots of things, lots and lots of tasks. Whereas development, it's more about the complexity of the individual problem to solve. And that requires the ability to focus and turn off the outside world and let your brain work. Okay, so we have these similar areas, but notice the managers direct the company. And the manager's version of complexity is very different than the developer's definition of complexity, which makes it difficult for them to understand each other. It makes it difficult to create the right space. And so this is why the Agile movement really started out pushing back against management and say, hey, we need our space. We need to be able to think. We need you to be able to hold your word long enough for us to finish things so that we can actually get things done. So having said all that, I think the Agile movement actually does have a bright future to offer managers. Okay, and I think the key is that if you have a role like Agile coach, you need to think a bit more like a manager. And if you're a manager, you need to develop more of the skills of the Agile coach. I don't think we need this dichotomy that we've had up till now. Okay, so this actually takes me to my third truth. Okay, and this one is perhaps the most controversial. This transformation that we've been talking about in transformation programs, I don't think this is the way to go. I think we've been doing it wrong. I think we should be thinking more in terms of skills building. Okay, what skills do you need to lead an organization today? And I think a lot of our focus, the traditional management skills, they're not wrong, but they need to be interpreted, based on what we've learned through agility. So let's take a closer look at those skills. So for me, the first thing that a manager is expected to do, and even if I come in as an Agile coach, I'm expected to do that as well, is to enable the organization to achieve concrete objectives. And we need to keep our eye on the ball here. I hear a lot of coaches who say, oh, but it's not me doing it. I'm facilitating it. I'm enabling it. But they're bringing you in to do that, okay? And this is what we're actually going to be measured on. So what are the skills that we need for achieving objectives? Well, when I think about my last 9 months accelerating the development process at my German client, first thing was called clarity of purpose, understanding what are we actually trying to achieve. The next one was to be able to make decisions. And even simple things like, what are we going to use as our reference case? How are we going to know that we're making improvements? These proved to be remarkably difficult to get. Particularly when you don't have a trust culture, when people are afraid of the consequences of taking a decision. The next thing is to focus on tangible results. Okay, if all we talk about is some abstract value, it's very, very difficult to know if we've done anything. Okay, when we're developing a product, we need to have something that works, something that we can show, something that we can get feedback on, and we need to do that at regular intervals. Now, I call that cadence. Okay, so tangible results is what we produce, and this is something that we can show users, customers, and other stakeholders. Visualization is how we manage the state of our work along the way, and these are kind of the basic essential skills. You see a lot of this in Scrum. Okay, everything in there. We talk about the product goal. We talk about the product owner making decisions. We talk about the product increment coming out at the end of the sprint. This is basically, Scrum is an enabling skill. for achieving a lot of results. Now, the problem, though, is the world is not static. And sometimes even our understanding of the problem to be solved is not static. So what we need to be able to do is respond effectively to change. And how we do that depends a lot on the context. Everything that we needed to achieve objectives, we still need them to be able to respond to change. So that's kind of the prerequisite. But then we come to, being able to recognize the need to change. Okay, that is, this is surfacing impediments and surfacing opportunities and being able to prioritize them. It's easy to say, I want, and let's try to get the organization to do everything. Unfortunately, that also makes it very easy to overload the organization to the point where it can't do anything at all, and even simple things take forever. Okay, activating the intelligence of the organization. Okay, no one person is smarter than everybody. Okay, so how do we actually activate the intelligence of the team so that we get all of the we get all of the know-how and all of the problems and all of the perspectives. Okay, when you do this, you can actually create alignment on the why, alignment on the goal. And once everyone understands and agrees on what the goal is, and this was actually a big part of what I was trying to do, was create this alignment from the top to the bottom about what we're actually trying to achieve. And once we got that, and once people understood the vision and really believed in the vision, then it was much easier to move forward. And then we got rid of a lot of what in Germany is known as Grundsatzdiskussionen, discussing the fundamentals over and over, and so we could actually move forward. Now, what enables this? And I've actually come to view building relationships as a skill and something that we learn. Okay, and the relationships make the processes possible. If you go straight to the process, but you don't trust the people you're working with, or you're afraid of the people you're working with, then it's actually very difficult to create these processes, and everything moves very slowly. So one of the key skills is, how do you create a trust culture? Okay, this is something that you can do. This is something you can learn how to do, and you do it as much through example, as well as explicit things like making agreements to ask clarifying questions, let each other finish people's sentences. It's amazingly little stuff, the little shaping the interactions between the people, which enable the culture to emerge. Now, I think the most underrated skill here is listening, actually listening to what the other person says, and creating a space where everyone can be heard. And this takes us to dialogue. This sounds a lot like coaching because it's a lot of the same tools, but it's really about asking questions, clarifying questions, powerful questions, wicked questions, having the right question for the right situation to surface the necessary information so the organization can take a good decision. And then ultimately, it's about facilitation. It's about working with a group. How do you lead a group through a thought process that they can take on a problem, solve the problem, come to a conclusion, and actually take a decision that sticks, where everybody, remember that picture I showed at the beginning, where everyone's got their thumbs up. Now, my belief is that if we can learn the skills, we can actually, we actually develop our abilities to shape the organization to be able to work together more effectively. And the transformation happens by itself. So what I'd like to do is I'd like you to imagine just for a moment, thanks to your leadership, okay, thanks to your leadership, your company is able to climb this pyramid all the way to the top. Okay, that's what learning the skills could mean for you. So 3 hidden truths. The first one, companies need what agility has to offer. The second is, even though we've had a troubled relationship in the past, we have a lot to offer each other. Okay, and it's through skills building and not through transformation initiatives that we're going to really develop and profit from, how should I say, the capabilities that each one can offer the others. So I was asked if I could offer a free gift or something to kind of help you get going on this. So we did a 1-question version of this, kind of understanding where our companies are doing. I've created a thing I call the Purple Success Monitor. It's an assessment to understand how your teams and organization are doing. So what I'd like to do is offer you the possibility to take that one, try that one out for free. I've put the link in the chat. You check the forum and it will send you a link which lets you do the assessment for free. if you would like to, if you think it's cool, if you think you learned something useful, I would offer for a maximum of 3 companies and a maximum of 3 teams per company. If you would like a free assessment within your company, I would be happy to offer that for you as well. And what you end up with is something that looks like this to understand on about 15 different dimensions how your teams are doing. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. And I'm going to pass the talking stick back to Jose for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. Great insights. We have 2 questions on the Q&A section. The first one, how can I get Scrum certified? I will show it on stage.
Okay. So the short answer to that is take a class. There are trainers around the world who will offer you classes. If you, I recommend either Scrum Alliance or I'm a Scrum Alliance trainer. So disclaimer, I also recommend scrum.org. Any of the other certifications, I would watch out for them because they may or may not be authentic. Maybe Scrum, well, I don't know. Let's say Scrum Alliance and scrum.org. Just Google for that on the net. Generally, they involve a course. I recommend that you take a course because you're learning there from an expert. It is possible just to learn it from the book. I actually at the Scrum Ambassador site, I've actually got a collection of videos where you can basically learn the basics in about 20 minutes. Now that doesn't really lead to a formal certification, although I also have an assessment on the page, which you can do as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. We'll mark that's answered. And we have another question that we can tackle real quick. Is this one. Does this depend upon which sector you are? Retail, first to market for sure. But what about construction, healthcare, and other sectors?
Okay, well, a question that's formulated that generally, the answer is almost always it depends. Okay, now there are some markets which are very obviously about acceleration. Where I think we're in this market, and I think maybe big chunks of the industry haven't realized that, is the automobile industry. Okay, I was at a talk at the regional Scrum gathering in Sri Lanka last year, and we had a guy from China who was explaining the record from idea to product on the market for a Chinese automobile manufacturer was 8 months. Think about that. From conception of the model to having that model available for sale in the stores. I don't know if that was in China. Or if that was just in China or also in Europe, but basically an 8-month turnaround time. Now, if you go back and look at Joe Justice's Speed Talk when he introduced the idea of agility to car building, he was saying, 10 years was not at all uncommon for the car industry. Okay, and I've worked with a supplier of semiconductors. So they make semiconductors for the car industry. Their time from idea to prototype to results from the prototype was 6 months. So they are just barely able to test a prototype in the time that their clients want to deliver a new car. Okay, so I think if you're thinking slow is okay, you're at risk of being passed on the right, by somebody who's going to kill you, basically. So, to answer Louise's question, I would say, yes, it depends. The industry that I was working in, they didn't think speed was an issue until suddenly it was. Okay, and they've actually, found a customer that needs speed, that would take the speed if they could give it to them. So I would say it's almost always a potential competitive advantage to be faster than your competition.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. I will mark this answered. And last question, we have like 30 seconds, but maybe we can show on stage. And it's a very broad question, but here you go. How to facilitate a value-driven cultural transformation?
Oh, man. That is a really, really, really tough question.
Indeed.
In fact, I would almost say the only way to answer that is to reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's have a conversation about it. For me, a lot of the things is, I think the first thing to realize is nobody is smarter than everybody. And what we're really looking at is to develop our skills to activate the intelligence of the entire organization. Now, I've published a guide called the Purple Skill Set. Okay, and you'll find it on my profile in LinkedIn. So you shared my LinkedIn profile there. If you go to the featured post, it's like the second post. And there's a collection of skills. Oh, and by the way, if you do the assessment, one of the things you get is when you get a confirmation email from the assessment, it also includes a link to the guide to purple skills, and that kind of gives you an outline of the skill set that you need to make this happen.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter, for all the insights, experiences shared during the session. Really great takeaways there that can challenge our thoughts at some point. And thanks to all the audience for joining and engaging in the chat and Q&A section. We'll move on to our next section shortly. So feel free to check out the agenda to see what's coming up next. And remember, you can continue the conversation with our sponsors by visiting their booth. And thanks again, Peter. See you in
Okay.
the next session, everybody. Thank you. Have a great one.